You think death is a moment, a clean break, a final line, a switch flipped to black. You imagine something leaves the body, something essential, something you, and when it leaves, everything else stops. This is the picture you carry. Quietly, constantly, life inside, death outside. But physics does not see a boundary there. It never did. Your body does not recognize ending. Your atoms do not recognize you. The universe does not recognize the moment you call death. You are certain something vanishes. Physics is not so certain. What you call you is not a thing, not an object, not a location, not even clearly defined. And if that is true, what exactly could end? The unsettling possibility is this. The story you tell yourself about dying may be built on a picture of reality that never existed. And if that picture collapses, death stops looking like a disappearance. It becomes something far stranger. You imagine death as a line, a precise instant. Before it, life. After it, nothing. A last breath, a last heartbeat, a final second where everything simply stops. But physics has no concept of a final second. There is no equation for ending, no variable for lastness, no boundary in nature labeled here existence stops. This way of seeing comes from human experience, not from the structure of reality itself. When doctors declare a time of death, it feels exact, a number written down, a moment recorded. But this precision is practical, not fundamental. Your heart does not stop everywhere at once. Your cells do not cease together. Your brain does not switch off like a light. Processes fail gradually. Signals weaken. Chemical reactions drift out of balance. There is no single instant where the body crosses a universal boundary from being to not being. There is only a complex system losing its ability to maintain itself. You want a clean division. Nature offers none. This discomfort was central to how Richard Feynman described the world. Physics does not describe what things are, only what they do. It tracks motion, interaction, transformation, always change, never conclusion, and change does not produce final moments. Consider something simple, a wave reaching the shore. Where does the wave end? You can point to a place, you can name a time, but the water does not stop existing. The motion simply spreads, weakens, merges with other motion. What you called the wave was a temporary pattern, not a permanent object that could truly vanish. You still want to say, yes, but death is different. Is it? Look closely at what actually happens in a dying body. Oxygen levels fall. Electrical activity becomes disordered. Cells lose coordination. Temperature shifts. Molecules continue colliding, exchanging energy, rearranging themselves exactly as before. The same atoms remain. The same physical laws continue. The same interactions unfold. Nothing in the fabric of reality marks a final boundary. The idea of a moment of death exists because the human mind prefers sharp edges. We divide the continuous into categories, living or dead, on or off, present or gone. These divisions help us function. They help us speak, but they are not written into the universe. Physics describes a world of uninterrupted processes, endlessly transforming, never pausing to acknowledge a conclusion. From that perspective, what you call death is not an event that happens at a moment. It is the gradual failure of a pattern you mistook for a permanent thing. And if death is not a moment, then the question quietly changes. Not when does life end, but what exactly was continuing in the first place. You believe your body is a thing you possess, a stable object, a container that holds you, a physical structure that remains itself from birth to death. This feels obvious. You point to your hand and say, mine. You imagine the same body persisting through time, like a statue that slowly ages, but remains fundamentally the same object. But physics does not see a stable object there. It sees flow. Right now, as you sit listening, your body is not a fixed collection of matter. It is a continuous exchange with the world around you. You breathe in atoms that were once in oceans, forests, and other people. You breathe out atoms that will never return. Every few seconds, molecules enter your bloodstream, participate in chemical reactions, and leave again. The oxygen you just inhaled becomes part of water, carbon dioxide, heat, It moves on. Your skin sheds cells by the millions. Your gut replaces its lining in days. Your bones restructure themselves. Your brain rewires its connections. The matter composing your body today is not the matter that composed it years ago. Much of it was not even part of you months ago. And yet you still say, this is the same body. Why? Because what persists is not the material. What persists is the pattern. Imagine a whirlpool in a river. It appears stable. You can point to it. You can watch it for minutes, hours, sometimes longer. It seems like a thing, an object in the water, but the water forming the whirlpool is never the same. Molecules constantly flow through it. Nothing inside the structure stays. The whirlpool exists only as a maintained pattern of motion. Your body is closer to a whirlpool than a statue. Food enters, matter rearranges, waste exits. Energy flows through every cell. What you call your body is a dynamic organization that must constantly rebuild itself to remain what it is. Stop the flow, and the structure dissolves. This challenges a quiet assumption behind the fear of death. You imagine something you own being taken away, a solid physical possession that persists until a final loss. But physics suggests there was never a fixed object to lose. Even in what you call life, the boundary between your body and the world is porous, unstable, negotiable. The atoms in your bloodstream were recently part of air, soil, sunlight, other organisms. Soon they will be again. The separation you feel between you and the universe is maintained moment by moment through active processes. It is not permanent, and this raises a deeper question. If the body is not a stable object, if its matter is constantly replaced, if its existence depends on continuous exchange, then what exactly makes it yours? Ownership implies permanence. Identity implies stability. But the physical reality of the body offers neither. What you call your body is an ongoing event, a temporary organization of matter moving through the universe. And if the body itself is not a fixed thing, the idea of losing it at a precise moment becomes harder to define, because nothing that was ever truly static can truly have a final state. The ground beneath the idea of death shifts again, not a moment, not an object, only a pattern, sustained for a time. You assume there is a center, a stable observer inside your body, a continuous you that remains the same while everything else changes. Memories accumulate, experiences unfold, and behind it all, you imagine a persistent self, the one who lives, the one who dies. This feels undeniable. It feels immediate. But physics does not describe a central self. It describes activity. Inside your brain, there is no single place where you exist, no command center, no final observer watching the world. There are only vast networks of neurons exchanging electrical signals, patterns interacting with other patterns, billions of cells firing, signals looping, feedback shaping new signals. What you call yourself emerges from this motion. Consider a flame. You can point to a candle and say the flame is there. It appears continuous, stable, persistent. But the flame is not a thing. It is a process. Fuel combining with oxygen, releasing energy, sustaining further reactions. The flame exists only while the activity continues. Blow out the candle, and nothing leaves. No object escapes. The process simply stops organizing matter in that particular way. The materials remain. The energy spreads. The pattern is gone. Your sense of self behaves in a similar way. Your personality is not stored in a single location. Your thoughts are not permanent objects. Your memories are physical changes in neural connections, constantly rewritten. Even the feeling of being the same person over time is constructed. Your brain continuously rebuilds the story of identity, stitching together moments into a narrative of continuity. This reconstruction is so seamless you never notice it. But consider this. Every experience alters the structure of your brain. Every memory reshapes the system that remembers. The physical arrangement of matter producing your thoughts today is not identical to yesterday's, and yet you feel like the same self. Why? Because what persists is not a fixed entity. It is the continuity of a process. A melody played on a piano remains recognizable even as each note vanishes the moment it sounds. The identity of the melody exists in the pattern across time, not in any single moment of sound. The The self is closer to a melody than a stone, a structured sequence, a dynamic pattern, a temporary coherence in motion. This challenges the deepest intuition about death. You fear that you will disappear, that a solid inner presence will suddenly vanish. But if the self is not an object, not a stable thing that exists independently of physical processes, then what exactly would disappear? A process does not go anywhere when it ends. It does not depart. It does not travel. It simply ceases to be maintained. The atoms remain. The energy remains. The components continue interacting in new ways. Only the particular organization that produced the experience of being you is no longer sustained. And even this description assumes a clear boundary where the process stops. An assumption we have already seen is difficult to define. The intuition of a permanent self creates the intuition of a final loss. Remove the permanent self, and the meaning of death changes. What you call you is not a fixed presence moving through time. It is an event happening in time, a pattern briefly holding itself together in a universe of constant change. If death is not a moment, if the body is not a fixed object, if the self is not a stable thing, then what actually happens when a person dies? Something clearly changes, something profound, something irreversible. But physics describes that change in a very different language than disappearance. It speaks of organization. To be alive is not merely to contain matter. A rock contains matter. A cloud contains matter. What distinguishes a living system is the extraordinary degree of order it maintains. Your body continuously resists disorder. Cells repair damage. Proteins fold into precise shapes. Chemical gradients are carefully maintained. Temperature is regulated. Information flows through coordinated networks. This organization is fragile. It must be actively sustained every moment through energy consumption. You burn fuel simply to remain structured. Life is not stillness. Life is controlled instability. Physics gives a name to the tendency that opposes this order: entropy. Entropy measures how dispersed and unstructured a system becomes. Left alone, organized structures tend to break down. Differences even out. Patterns dissolve. Order spreads into randomness. A living body delays this tendency by constantly pushing against it. You take in energy from your environment, food, sunlight stored in chemical bonds, and use that energy to maintain the delicate arrangement of your internal processes. You are not avoiding entropy. You are holding it back. Dying, from the perspective of physics, is what happens when that resistance fails. The processes that maintain structure lose coordination. Cells can no longer regulate their chemistry. Gradients collapse. Repair mechanisms stop functioning. Order gives way to disorder. Notice what this description does not include. Nothing leaves. Nothing escapes. Nothing is removed from reality. The molecules remain exactly where physics expects them to be, continuing to follow the same laws of motion and interaction. The atoms in your brain do not vanish when consciousness fades. The energy in your body does not disappear when your heart stops. What ends is the organized activity. Imagine an intricate sandcastle at the edge of the sea. For hours it holds a precise form: towers, walls, detailed patterns. Then the tide rises. Water moves through the structure. The arrangement collapses. Where did the sand go? Nowhere. The material persists. The structure does not. What you call death is closer to the collapse of a sandcastle than the removal of its substance. The body loses its ability to maintain the complex arrangement that produced metabolism, awareness, memory, sensation. The coordinated pattern dissolves into simpler interactions. But even this is not a single event. Some cells continue functioning briefly after others fail. Certain tissues remain active for hours. Chemical reactions proceed long after the organism is no longer considered alive. The transition from organized activity to disordered activity unfolds gradually, unevenly. There is no sharp boundary where order suddenly becomes chaos, only a direction of change. This challenges another deeply rooted image: the idea that something essential departs the body, leaving it empty. Physics finds no evidence of departure. It finds transformation of structure. The distinction is subtle but profound. A departure suggests removal. A transformation suggests rearrangement. In one picture, something vanishes from the universe. In the other, the universe simply changes configuration. From the standpoint of physical law, the latter is all that ever happens. What you call dying is the loss of a highly improbable organization, a pattern that required continuous energy to sustain itself. When the processes maintaining that organization can no longer operate, the pattern dissolves, not into nothing, into the ongoing activity of the world, and this raises a more unsettling possibility. If death is the breakdown of organization rather than disappearance, if nothing truly leaves the universe, then what happens to everything that once composed you? You imagine death as removal, a subtraction from the world, a presence erased, something that was here, now gone. But physics is built on a principle that quietly refuses this picture. The universe does not lose things. At the deepest level of physical law, certain quantities are conserved. Matter transforms. Energy changes form. Motion redistributes. But the total accounting never shows a disappearance. Nothing is taken out of reality. Everything is rearranged within it. The atoms in your body existed long before you were born. They were forged in ancient stars, scattered through space, assembled into planets, oceans, and living systems. For a brief period, they participate in the organization you call your body. Then they move on. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a literal description of physical processes. When the organized activity of the body breaks down, its components do not vanish. They disperse. Molecules separate. Chemical bonds rearrange. Heat radiates outward. Matter returns to wider cycles of interaction. Carbon enters the atmosphere. Minerals return to the soil. Energy spreads into surrounding space. The universe absorbs nothing. It redistributes everything. Even the smallest actions of your life leave traces that cannot be undone. Every movement of your hand changes the air. Every word you speak rearranges pressure waves that propagate outward. Every interaction transfers energy, altering the future paths of countless particles. These effects do not reverse. They continue outward indefinitely. Physics describes a world where every event reshapes the universe permanently, however subtly. The consequences spread, becoming increasingly difficult to trace, but never erased. From this perspective, death does not remove your physical existence from reality. It changes how that existence is distributed. What was once a tightly organized structure becomes widely dispersed influence. But there is a deeper layer to this idea, one that unsettles the intuition even more. You might accept that matter and energy are conserved. That seems straightforward. But what about information? The structure of your brain encodes memories, habits, tendencies, the physical record of a lifetime of experience. When that structure dissolves, what happens to the information it contained? Physics does not offer a simple answer. In many processes, information becomes effectively unrecoverable. When a drop of ink spreads through water, the precise arrangement of molecules that defined its original shape becomes practically impossible to reconstruct. The information is not destroyed in a strict sense. It is dispersed into correlations among countless particles, but it is lost to observation. The same may be true for the detailed structure that once supported your thoughts. As the organized arrangement of matter breaks down, the information embodied in that arrangement spreads into the environment, encoded in ways too complex to track. Nothing leaves the universe. But the recognizable pattern becomes unreachable. This is not annihilation, it is dilution. The difference is subtle, but physics insists on it. What you call a person is a temporary concentration of matter, energy, and information, a localized pattern maintained for a time. Death is the loss of that concentration, not the removal of its contents. Like a drop of dye dispersing into an ocean, the substance remains. The pattern no longer stands apart. This challenges the idea that death separates you from the universe. In a strictly physical sense, the opposite happens. The boundaries that once maintained a distinct organization dissolve. The distinction between you and the surrounding world becomes increasingly blurred. The components that once formed a single coordinated system become part of larger processes, not outside reality, more deeply within it. And yet, despite all this continuity, humans still experience death as a definitive ending. We speak of absence, we feel loss, we recognize a boundary that seems undeniable. If physics describes only transformation, where does the sense of finality come from? Why does death appear to us as an ending at all? You experience death as absence, a voice no longer heard, a face no longer seen, a presence that was once there, now missing. This feeling is powerful. It seems undeniable. It feels like direct evidence that something has ended. But notice where this experience occurs, not in the laws of physics, not in the motion of atoms, but in the mind of the observer. The sense of an ending emerges from perception. Your brain constructs reality through contrast. It detects changes, identifies patterns, and builds expectations about what will continue. When a familiar pattern suddenly stops appearing, the brain registers a violation, a break in continuity. You call this break an ending. Consider a simple example. A clock ticks steadily in a quiet room. After a few minutes, you stop noticing the sound. Your brain predicts its continuation and filters it out. Then the ticking stops. Silence appears. But nothing called silence entered the room. Air molecules still move. Sound waves from distant sources still travel. Physical activity continues exactly as before. What changed was your expectation. The absence you perceive is a mismatch between prediction and observation. Death produces a far deeper version of this effect. A human being is not just a pattern of matter, but a pattern of interaction, gestures, speech, responses, shared memories. Your brain learns to expect these interactions. It models their continuation. When they cease, the prediction collapses. The mind interprets this collapse as disappearance, but this interpretation reflects the limits of perception, not the structure of the universe. Nature does not register absence. It registers only what occurs. Where you perceive a missing person, physics describes rearranged matter, redistributed energy, altered interactions. The world continues changing without acknowledging a boundary called loss. The feeling of finality arises because human experience depends on stable narratives. You organize reality into stories with beginnings, middles, and endings. Identity becomes a character. A life becomes a plot. Death becomes the closing chapter. This narrative structure is useful. It allows memory, meaning, and communication, but it imposes discrete boundaries on a continuous world. Richard Feynman often emphasized that nature does not care about the categories humans create. The divisions we find obvious, object versus environment, life versus non-life, presence versus absence, are not fundamental features of physical law. They are convenient descriptions layered onto continuous processes. Death is one of these descriptions. It is a label applied when a certain pattern of organization and interaction falls below the threshold where we recognize it as a person. The designation reflects our criteria for recognition, not an event the universe itself identifies. This does not make the experience unreal. The sense of loss is real. The absence in human life is real. But the interpretation of that absence as a cosmic ending is not dictated by physics. There is no signal transmitted to the universe announcing that a life has concluded. No boundary appears in space or time. No fundamental transition separates what was from what is. There is only ongoing transformation, continuous, indifferent to the categories imposed upon it. This realization shifts the question once again. If endings exist primarily in the perspective of observers, if the universe itself contains only change, then the distinction between life and death may not be a feature of reality, but a feature of how reality is perceived. And if that boundary is constructed rather than fundamental, what does that imply about the nature of existence itself? You were taught that reality is divided, birth and death, beginning and end, existence and non-existence. These boundaries feel fundamental. They seem built into the structure of the world itself. But as physics describes it, the universe contains no such divisions. It contains only states transforming into other states. Stars form from collapsing clouds of gas. Stars burn. Stars disperse their material back into space. Nothing truly begins. Nothing truly ends. Structures assemble and dissolve within an ongoing process that never pauses. The atoms in your body once moved through ancient stars. The energy flowing through your cells began its journey long before the earth existed. The matter that will disperse after your death will continue participating in future structures you cannot imagine. From the perspective of physics, you are not an isolated episode in reality. You are a temporary arrangement in a continuous history of transformation. The universe does not produce separate things that later vanish. It produces patterns, localized organizations that arise, persist for a time, and fade into broader processes. A storm means nothing to the atmosphere as a whole. A wave means nothing to the ocean. A whirlpool means nothing to the river. They are events within larger systems, not independent objects with absolute boundaries. This way of seeing removes the sharp distinction between life and death. Both become phases of organization within the same continuous physical world. Life is a region of intense coordination. Death is the relaxation of that coordination. But the underlying activity, the motion of matter, the flow of energy, the unfolding of physical law never stops. This is not a comforting idea. It removes the drama of finality. It removes the idea of a decisive exit. It denies the clean simplicity of disappearance. Instead, it suggests something more unsettling. There was never a permanent entity to begin with. The self you experience is a temporary coherence in a universe that does not recognize permanent structures. The boundary between you and the world was always provisional, maintained moment by delicate processes. When those processes can no longer sustain the boundary, the distinction dissolves, not into nothingness, into continuity. This perspective forces a shift in how existence itself is understood. You are not a thing moving through time toward an ending. You are a process within time, a pattern the universe briefly forms as part of its ongoing activity. The question is no longer what happens after death, as if reality were divided by a wall. The deeper question becomes, why does the universe produce temporary patterns capable of experiencing themselves at all? Physics does not yet answer this. It describes the mechanisms of matter and energy. It reveals the continuity beneath apparent boundaries. But it does not explain why certain arrangements of particles give rise to awareness, to memory, to the strange experience of being a self-observing the world. There the story becomes uncertain, and in that uncertainty lies the most unsettling possibility. If reality is a continuous transformation without true endings, if identity is a temporary pattern within that transformation, if the boundary you call death is a label imposed by human perception, then existence is not a collection of separate lives surrounded by nothingness. It is a single unfolding process, endlessly rearranging itself, briefly forming structures that can look back and wonder what they are. For a time, the universe organizes matter into a pattern that calls itself you. For a time, it maintains the delicate activity that produces thought, memory, sensation. Then the pattern changes. The process continues, and the universe never marks the difference.